There's a saying that power protects its own, that people with authority can always sense another authority walking toward them, the way a compass needle swings north without being asked. It's a comforting idea if you're the one with the compass. But the truth, the uncomfortable truth that nobody hangs on motivational posters, is that power doesn't protect anyone from its own blindness. And blindness, when it sits behind a hotel front desk with a name tag and a pressed blazer and 17 floors of premium real estate backing it up, has a way of making catastrophically expensive decisions. Craig Demler made his on the evening of October 7th, and he made it in under 4 seconds. He was 29 years old, with a receding hairline he compensated for with an aggressive side part that fooled nobody, and a habit of rolling his lower lip between his teeth when he was processing something he'd already decided. His uniform, the Meridian Grand's standard burgundy blazer with the embossed gold crest, fit tightly across his arms in a way that suggested it had been ordered optimistically. He stood behind the front desk of one of Washington, D.C.'s most prestigious hotels with the posture of a man who has mistaken proximity to luxury for the ownership of it. At 6:52 p.m., he looked up and saw the Ibarra family crossing the lobby. He saw a carry-on suitcase in charcoal gray, the handle slightly worn. He saw a man in his mid-50s wearing a relaxed navy blazer over a simple white shirt, no tie, no ostentatious watch, nothing that performed wealth loudly enough to satisfy Craig Demler's particular calibration. He saw a woman beside him in a deep green dress, her natural hair pinned elegantly at the crown, carrying a leather tote that had been well used. Behind them, 2 adult children, a daughter and a son, both in their late 20s, moved with the easy familiarity of people comfortable in their own skin, but not especially concerned about the room's impression of them. Craig saw all of that. What he did not see was the diplomatic credential clipped inside the man's jacket. He didn't register the particular quality of stillness in the woman's bearing, the stillness of someone who has been the most consequential person in rooms far more complicated than this lobby. He didn't notice the daughter immediately opening a secure government application on her phone, or the quiet way the son assessed the room's exits and entry points with eyes that had been professionally trained to do exactly that. He saw the worn suitcase handle. He made his decision. What happened next would take 49 minutes to fully unravel, and 3 years to fully resolve, at a cost of $3.4 million, and one career that will never recover from what Craig Demler chose to do before that family reached his desk. Keep watching. You need to see every moment of this. The Meridian Grand Hotel occupied a full city block in the northwest quadrant of Washington, D.C., 4 streets from Embassy Row and 6 from a federal complex that housed 2 cabinet agencies and a secure international conference facility used for bilateral diplomatic meetings. It was the kind of hotel that attracted dignitaries, senior government officials, and international delegations, not because it advertised itself to them specifically, but because its location and reputation had made it the natural gravitational center for that world over 4 decades of operation. The lobby ceiling rose 30 feet above a floor of pale gray marble veined in white. A long front desk in dark mahogany stretched along the east wall. The air smelled of something wood-forward and synthetic, a diffuser scent that was aiming for old money library and landing somewhere closer to furniture polish and ambition. Behind that desk, Craig Demler had been working the evening shift for 14 months. He had been written up once for an incident involving a couple he'd questioned about their reservation, in a way that the hotel's complaint log described diplomatically as exhibiting insufficient professionalism. That write-up had been filed, reviewed, and placed in a folder that had not been examined since. Craig knew about the write-up. He had not changed anything. Ambassador Emeka Ibarra was 56 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair silvering at the temples, and a face that had been shaped by decades of listening carefully before speaking. He had served the Federal Republic of Nigeria's foreign ministry for 31 years, had been stationed in Geneva, London, Nairobi, and now Washington, and had held the rank of ambassador at large for 6 years, during which time his portfolio had encompassed bilateral trade negotiations, multilateral climate frameworks, and the delicate back-channel work that never appears in press releases, but upon which several fragile peace agreements quietly depend. He was, in the language of international diplomacy, a significant person. His wife, Dr. Yewande Abara, was 2 years younger. She held a joint appointment at Howard University's School of Public Health and the Georgetown Medical Center, where she led a research unit studying infectious disease preparedness in West African nations. She had published 81 peer-reviewed papers. She had been deposed in 3 international court proceedings as an expert witness in matters of public health law. She had a particular, highly developed instinct for when a situation was being managed in bad faith, an instinct built over decades of sitting across negotiating tables from people who smiled while obstructing. And she had activated it the moment Craig Demler looked up from his terminal. Their daughter, Chidinma, was 29, a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. She had, in the past 3 years, successfully litigated 7 cases involving racial discrimination in public accommodations. She recognized the specific sequence, the flicker of assessment, the decision made before words were exchanged, the theatrical slowness of the keyboard, because she had taken depositions from 8 people who had described it using almost identical language. Their son, Emeka Jr., was 27 and worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, which his business card simply described as U.S. Department of Defense. He had been trained, among other things, to read rooms. He had read this one in the first 6 seconds. The family had been staying at the Meridian Grand twice annually for 3 years, always in the same suite, the Meridian Suite on the 14th floor, booked through the embassy's administrative office, always on the diplomatic rate that the hotel had established through a formal agreement with the State Department's Diplomatic Affairs liaison. The reservation for this visit had been confirmed 11 weeks ago. The embassy's administrative director, a meticulous woman named Grace Osei, had the confirmation email, the charge receipt, and the name of the hotel's reservations manager saved in a single folder specifically for this property. Ambassador Abara set his passport and his State Department-issued credential card on the counter. "Good evening," he said. His voice had a quality that people who'd spent time around him often tried to describe and never quite managed. It was deep and unhurried, and carried a precision that was the opposite of aggression. It wasn't a voice that asked for attention. It assumed it, the way a room's largest piece of furniture simply is. "Abara, we have the Meridian Suite, 5 nights. Confirmation number DP8821. Craig looked at the documents. Not carefully. A glance, the kind of glance that takes in a name and a photograph and arrives at a conclusion that has nothing to do with either. He typed, stopped, typed again with the deliberate slowness of someone performing effort rather than conducting it. "Abara," he said, with a pause before the second syllable that was not confusion and was not unfamiliarity and was something else entirely. "That's correct," Ambassador Abara said. More typing. Craig's lower lip moved to his teeth for a moment, rolled, released. "I'm having a little trouble locating this in our system." "The confirmation number is DP8821, the ambassador said. "The reservation was coordinated through your hotel's diplomatic affairs contact, Mr. James Whitmore, booked through our embassy's administrative office and charged to the mission account on the 14th of September. Craig typed the confirmation number, stopped. "Our system is showing this reservation as having a payment issue. The account verification is coming up incomplete." "That account," Chidinma said, and her voice, precise and level, came from slightly to her father's right. Has been used at this hotel on 4 previous occasions without a single payment issue. What specifically does the screen show? Craig looked at her with the micro-expression of someone recalibrating an expectation. He had expected, perhaps, a quieter response to his manufactured problem. "Ma'am, the system flags are..." "What does the screen show?" Chidinma's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Is it showing a declined payment, a hold, or a system error? Those are 3 different things with 3 different implications." Craig blinked. "It's showing an unverified status on the account." "Then call James Whitmore," Ambassador Ibarra said. "His number is on file with this hotel. That's the appropriate resolution step. Call him, confirm the account, and we'll check in." Craig's jaw tightened in the way of someone deciding not to follow the obvious path because following it would require conceding something. "Mr. Whitmore isn't available at this hour, and hotel policy requires..." "It's 6:55 p.m., Chidinma said. "Mr. Whitmore absolutely has an after-hours line for diplomatic liaison inquiries, which this hotel is contractually required to maintain. I know this because I have reviewed your hotel's diplomatic accommodation agreement, which is a public record." She paused. "Would you like me to recite the clause number?" There was a moment, brief, significant, where Craig Demler had the opportunity to step back from what he was doing. The moment passed. "I'm going to need to speak with a supervisor before I can resolve this," he said. And then, with the particular confidence of someone who has confused bureaucratic stalling for authority, "In the meantime, we do have standard rooms available at the current rate if you'd like to." "We would not like to," Dr. Yawanda said. She had been quiet until now, watching Craig with the attentive, clinical patience of a researcher observing a process she's been studying for a long time. Her voice, when it came, was soft and exact, like a scalpel. "We have a confirmed reservation for a suite. We have the confirmation number, the charge receipt, and the name of the hotel representative who processed the booking. What we do not have is a reason to accept a lesser room as a substitute, and what you do not have is a valid basis for declining to honor our reservation." She tilted her head slightly. "I would like your name, your employee number, and the name of your general manager. In writing, please." Craig's pen, the Meridian Grand branded one he'd been rolling between his thumb and forefinger since they'd arrived, went still. He tore a sheet from the notepad embossed with the hotel crest. He wrote 3 things. He slid it across the marble counter. Chidinma photographed it before her father picked it up. "We'll wait in your lobby," Ambassador Ibarra said. He picked up his credential card, returned it to his jacket pocket, and turned. And the 4 of them moved to the cluster of leather chairs near the lobby's north windows, with the unhurried deliberateness of people who know that time is working for them, not against them. What Craig Demler did next was the mistake that everything else would be built upon. At 7:04 p.m., he accessed the reservation system using his own login credentials, automatically time-stamped, automatically logged, automatically preserved in an audit trail that the hotel's IT system maintained for every action taken by every employee. He located reservation DP 8821, which was showing in the system as confirmed, fully paid, and active. It had never flagged. There was no payment issue. There was no unverified status. He had invented that. He changed the status to canceled, non-arrival. He did this in 22 seconds, using a system he had operated for 14 months without ever considering that everything in it left a permanent, recoverable record. Then he straightened his blazer, rolled his lower lip, and waited. Emeka Jr. had sent a text to Grace Osei at 6:58 p.m., while his parents were still at the desk. The text was 4 words: "Front desk, come now." Grace Osei, who had been having dinner 2 miles away, and who had worked with Ambassador Ibarra's office for 11 years, and who knew the confirmation number DP 8821, the way she knew her own phone number, arrived in the Meridian Grand lobby at 7:31 p.m. with a folder under her arm and an expression that meant business in every language she spoke. She was 53, compact and meticulous, and she moved through the lobby's revolving door and across the marble floor to the front desk with the direct purposefulness of someone who has already decided how this conversation will go. She set the folder on the counter. She produced, in order, the confirmation email from the hotel's reservation system dated September 14th, the credit card charge receipt for the mission account showing payment in full, the email correspondence with James Whitmore confirming the diplomatic rate and suite allocation, and the page from the hotel's diplomatic accommodation agreement showing the after-hours contact protocol. "My name is Grace Osei," she said to Craig, who was looking at the documents with the expression of someone watching a wall they built begin to visibly crack. "I am the administrative director of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That is Ambassador Ibarra's reservation. I confirmed it personally 11 weeks ago. I want to see exactly what your system currently shows for confirmation number DP8821. Craig turned his terminal toward her, slowly, the way you turn something toward someone when you already know what they're going to see. Grace looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long time, 3, 4, 5 seconds. Then she looked at Craig. Then she looked at the screen again. Cancelled. Non-arrival. Timestamp, 7:04 p.m. "This reservation," Grace said, and her voice was very quiet and very clear, "was active and fully confirmed when that family walked through your door. I know that because I confirmed it this morning." She straightened up. "Who is your general manager?" The general manager of the Meridian Grand was a man named Howard Pellman, 62 years old, 24 years in luxury hospitality management, currently eating dinner in his office on the second floor when his desk phone rang with a call from the Diplomatic Affairs Liaison Office that he would later describe, in a sworn deposition, as the worst call of his professional life. James Whitmore's voice had been level and careful, the way voices get when someone is choosing every word with full knowledge that the conversation is consequential. He had told Howard Pellman that Ambassador Ibarra was in the lobby. He had told him the reservation number. He had told him what had been done to it, and when, and by whom. And then he had said, "Howard, you need to understand who Ambassador Ibarra is." Howard Pellman understood. He had already pulled the name up on his phone before Whitmore finished the sentence, and he was reading the UN service record, the bilateral negotiations, the Georgetown lecture series his wife was conducting this week, the daughter's DOJ position, the son's employer listed as Department of Defense with no further specification. And something in his chest had gone hollow and cold. He came through the lobby at 7:38 p.m. in the rapid, contained stride of a man holding a controlled panic together through sheer professional habit. He found the family at the north windows, located Ambassador Ibarra, and introduced himself with a handshake and an expression of visible, genuine distress. "Ambassador Ibarra, I am deeply sorry." The words came fast, pressured. "I've been made aware of what happened, and I want you to know that this does not reflect—" "Mr. Pellman," Ambassador Ibarra said. He shook the hand. His face was composed, not cold, not angry in the way Pellman might have expected, but with the settled gravity of a man who is giving this moment the weight it deserves and no more. "I'd like you to tell me what your system currently shows for our reservation." Howard produced his tablet. He had already pulled the record. He turned it toward the ambassador, and Chidinma leaned forward before her father could, and she read the screen, and then she looked at the timestamp, and then she looked at her father. 7:04, she said quietly. 11 minutes after we sat down. Howard's face did something involuntary. a compression of his features, a tightening around the eyes, as if he could reduce the visual field of what he was looking at. I need to investigate how this— "There's nothing to investigate," Chidinma said, and there was no heat in her voice, which somehow made it more definitive. "Your system's audit trail will show a manual status change executed under a specific employee login at 7:04 p.m. The employee is standing behind that desk." She glanced toward Craig, who had been watching this exchange from across the lobby with the look of a man who is only now beginning to understand the full shape of his situation. "I'd like a printed copy of that audit trail. Tonight." Howard nodded. He was already typing. In that moment, Craig Demler's relationship with the Meridian Grand Hotel, with the burgundy blazer, the embossed crest, the marble counter, the sense of authority that had lived in him like a wrongly identified organ, began to end. The printed audit trail arrived in 14 minutes, produced by Howard Pellman with the grim efficiency of a man trying to get ahead of something he knows is already ahead of him. It showed, in precise time-stamped rows, every action taken on Reservation DP 8821 that evening. Confirmed status: unchanged from booking date through 7:03 p.m. Status change to canceled, non-arrival, 7:04 p.m. Employee login: C. Demler. 1 line. 22 seconds of work. The kind of record that, in a federal discrimination proceeding, is called a contemporaneous document, meaning it was created at the time of the incident by the responsible party in a system with no reason to lie. It is, in evidentiary terms, as clean as evidence gets. Chidinma photographed it. She also photographed the original confirmation email Grace Osei had brought, the charge receipt, the diplomatic accommodation agreement page, and the hotel notepad sheet bearing Craig Demler's handwriting, his name, his employee number, and Howard Pellman's name, all in Craig's own pen. She placed 2 calls that evening, both brief and purposeful. The first was to her supervisor at the Department of Justice, a personal call, not official, because she was on personal leave. She described what had happened in 4 sentences. Her supervisor listened and said, "Document everything. This is a clean Section 1981 pattern case, and if the diplomatic dimension is what you're describing, it goes several floors above that." The second call was to a civil rights attorney named Marcus Obi, a partner at a D.C. firm specializing in public accommodations discrimination. Marcus was 44 years old, methodical and precise, with a reputation for taking cases that other attorneys found complex and turning them into cases that juries found simple. He answered on the second ring. Chidinma told him the confirmation number, the timestamp, the audit trail, the father's credentials. Marcus said, "I'll be there in an hour." He arrived in 50 minutes, in a dark wool coat over a charcoal suit, carrying a briefcase that he set on the lobby table like he was setting down a foundation stone. He shook hands with Ambassador and Dr. Ibarra. He sat. He opened the briefcase. And then, for the next 40 minutes, he methodically assembled the framework of what he would subsequently describe to the press as one of the most thoroughly documented discrimination cases I have encountered in 20 years of practice. The first thing he placed on the table, a printout from the D.C. Office of Human Rights showing the Meridian Grand Hotel's complaint history over the preceding 5 years. 11 complaints, 8 involving black guests, 5 specifically describing front desk interactions in which confirmed reservations were claimed not to exist, or were described as having payment problems that the guests could immediately disprove. 3 of those 5 had resulted in quiet settlements under non-disclosure agreements. The pattern was not ambiguous once you were looking at it as a whole. The second thing, a case file Marcus had worked 2 years earlier. A family named the Okafor Williamses, mother, father, 3 children, who had arrived at the Meridian Grand for a confirmed anniversary package booking and been told the reservation couldn't be located, despite having the confirmation number. They had been offered a standard room at a rate 40% higher than their booking. They had declined and gone to a different hotel. They had filed a complaint that had been settled confidentially for an amount Marcus described simply as significant. Under the new litigation's discovery process, that NDA would be dissolved. The third thing Marcus placed on the table was not a document. It was his phone playing an audio file. The file had been provided, with full consent, by a Meridian Grand employee who had worked the desk alongside Craig Demler 6 months earlier. It was 42 seconds of a break room conversation in which Craig's voice, identifiable, recorded without his knowledge by a coworker who had been disturbed enough to preserve it, said the following, which Marcus played without commentary, allowing each word to occupy its own space in the air. "You can always tell when they're not going to be able to back it up. Just act like there's a system problem. They argue for a while and then they go. Easiest part of the job." 42 seconds. Howard Pellman, who had stayed for this meeting at Marcus's request, went still when the recording played. His breathing became audible. He looked at his hands for a moment, and then looked at Ambassador Ibarra and opened his mouth and found, apparently, nothing adequate in it. "Mr. Pellman," Marcus said, "you terminated Craig Demler tonight, correct?" "Yes," Howard said. Craig had been called to the general manager's office at 8:15 p.m. and handed a termination letter that HR had drafted in 17 minutes, a new personal record. "Good. We'll need his full employment history with this property, all prior complaints logged against him by name or desk location, and the names of every employee whose voice appears in staff communications related to front desk reservation practices over the past 3 years. That's a discovery request. You'll receive it formally tomorrow morning." "I'd also recommend," Marcus said, in the tone of someone who is being courteous rather than uncertain, "that your parent company's legal team be on a call with you by 9 a.m. The parent company's legal team was, in fact, on a call with Howard Pellman by 7:45 a.m. the next morning, because Marcus had also sent, at midnight, a formal notice of claim that outlined the case he intended to file. Violations of 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as applied to public accommodations under Section 2000A, and the D.C. Human Rights Act, with an additional diplomatic dimension arising from the status of the complainant under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and the consequent State Department notification that had been formally filed at 9 p.m. the previous evening. That last part, the State Department notification, had its own particular gravity. When an accredited diplomat is subjected to discriminatory denial of service on American soil, the relevant treaty framework obligates specific notification procedures. Those notifications had been filed. The relevant federal desk had received them. The conversations that followed between federal liaisons and the hotel's parent company were described, by one person who was in a position to know, as significantly clarifying regarding the scope of the problem. The formal proceedings were consolidated into a single action filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia 8 weeks after the incident. The case was titled Ibarra et al. Versus Meridian Grand Hotel LLC and Constellation Hospitality Group, and it was, from the moment it was filed, the kind of case that moves with unusual speed because everyone involved understands that the longer it moves slowly, the worse it gets for one side. The hearing that mattered most took place on a Wednesday morning in a federal courtroom on Constitution Avenue, in a room with pale wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell, a pointed contrast to the Meridian Grand's soft lobby glow. The power dynamics had rearranged themselves physically. Marcus Obi sat at the plaintiff's table beside Chidinma Ibarra, who was formerly co-counsel, with Ambassador and Dr. Ibarra seated directly behind them. The defendant's table had 4 attorneys representing the hotel and its parent company, which told you, again, everything about what they understood to be at stake. The first payoff moment came during the examination of the audit trail, when the defense's lead attorney attempted to suggest that the 7:04 p.m. status change might have been a system-generated automatic action following an account verification timeout. Marcus produced the hotel's own technical documentation, obtained in discovery, showing that no such automatic action existed in the system, that all status changes were manual, and that the specific action taken at 7:04 p.m. required at minimum 3 deliberate keystrokes. He then produced, from the same discovery, 11 other instances over Craig Demler's 14-month tenure in which reservation statuses had been manually changed on evenings when complaints were subsequently filed against the front desk. 11 instances. 10 involving guests with surnames suggesting African or African American heritage. The defense attorney's objection was sustained on a technicality. The jury had already read the numbers. The second payoff moment came when Marcus played, in the courtroom, the 42-second recording. The defense had challenged its admissibility. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Akosua-Mensah, 61, who had grown up in a household where her father's stories of being turned away from hotels in the 1960s were family history rather than distant past, had ruled it admissible as a statement against interest. The courtroom was quiet during those 42 seconds, in the way that spaces get when something true is being heard in a place where truth is formally required. Craig Demler was present. He had been required to testify. When Marcus played the recording, Craig looked at the table in front of him with the expression of someone who has finally reached the place they've been moving toward without realizing it, the place where the full weight of a choice arrives. The third payoff came during the judge's statement before the verdict. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. Judge Mensah, reading from her notes before announcing the verdict, said, and the transcript preserves this word for word, "The evidence in this case is not complex. It is voluminous. What occurred on the evening of October 7th was not an isolated error or a system failure. It was a practiced pattern of discriminatory conduct, enabled by institutional indifference, directed at a family whose dignity, regardless of their credentials, was entitled to protection under the law. Every person who walks through a public accommodation is protected. This case is about that principle, and this verdict will reflect it." The verdict: $3.4 million. Broken into components: $1.9 million to Ambassador and Dr. Ibarra for direct damages, emotional distress, and the specific harm to the ambassador's diplomatic activities arising from the incident. $700,000 to the 3 previously settled complainants, whose NDAs were dissolved by court order, enabling them, for the first time, to describe what had happened to them. $800,000 in punitive damages, directed at Constellation Hospitality Group, the parent company, for its failure to act on the documented pattern of complaints that had been in its possession for years. Craig Demler's termination had been immediate. His industry certification with the American Hotel and Lodging Educational Institute was suspended pending review, a review that, given the trial record, concluded in non-renewal. His name appeared in 3 separate industry publications' coverage of the case in ways that made future front desk employment at any property affiliated with a major hospitality group effectively impossible. He had, in 14 months of practiced small cruelties, built a wall around a career that no longer existed. The systemic remedies were Ambassador Ibarra's idea, and they were included in the settlement's non-monetary terms with the specificity of a man who understands that money, without structural change, is simply the price of continuing. The first, a mandatory third-party audit of front desk reservation practices at all 37 properties owned by Constellation Hospitality Group, to be conducted annually for 5 years by an independent civil rights organization with public reporting. The audit protocol was named, at the company's legal team's suggestion, and with a kind of bureaucratic irony that suited the moment, the Meridian Protocol. The second, a $500,000 fund, administered by the D.C. Office of Human Rights, for investigation and resolution of public accommodations discrimination complaints, specifically designed to support complainants who might lack the resources to retain private counsel, making the kind of case building Marcus Obi had done accessible to people who weren't related to a federal attorney. The third, a standing advisory role for Ambassador Ibarra on the State Department's Diplomatic Accommodations Oversight Committee, a committee that had previously had no standing civilian members, and that now had a formal channel for reporting patterns of discriminatory treatment of diplomatic personnel in American hospitality properties. Howard Pellman resigned before the verdict. He relocated eventually to a smaller property in Virginia, where his past wasn't a headline. He lasted 2 years. Craig Demler found work after 8 months of unemployment that emptied the savings he'd accumulated over a decade, at a logistics sorting facility in suburban Maryland. Night shift, hourly wages, a uniform vest with a different color scheme than burgundy. He had an apartment that was smaller than the Meridian Suites bathroom. He had, by all accounts, not significantly updated his understanding of what he had done, or why, or what it had cost the people it was done to before it cost him anything at all. He told people, when it came up, that he had been made an example of, that the system had been rigged against him, that the family had been looking for a lawsuit. He believed this. The belief sustained him. It also ensured that whatever he might have learned from the worst professional decision of his life would remain permanently unlearned, which is its own kind of consequence, quieter than the financial one, but no less permanent. There is a particular kind of mistake that feels like a small decision in the moment, a pause before a name, a keyboard touched with deliberate slowness, a status changed in 22 seconds in a system that records everything. The smallness of it is part of how it happens. It doesn't feel like a catastrophe being constructed. It feels like a routine, a habit, a series of choices so practiced they have stopped feeling like choices at all. What Craig Demler forgot, what people who sit behind counters and in front of terminals and between systems and the people those systems are supposed to serve always seem to forget, is that the person on the other side of that counter has a whole life the counter can't see, has credentials, relationships, legal knowledge, professional allies, and the particular powerful motivation of someone who is not going to let a 22-second keyboard action stand unremarked. The counter doesn't tell you who you're dealing with. It never did. Ambassador Ibarra didn't walk into that lobby looking for a fight. He walked in looking for a hotel room he had already paid for. What he found instead was a system that needed to be held accountable, and he had the tools, the family, the allies, and the principled refusal to accept a lesser room as a substitute for justice. $3.4 million later, the system at least has better records. And one man in a Maryland sorting facility has a lot of night shifts to think about what 22 seconds can cost. What would you have done if you were standing in that lobby? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If this story hit the way it was supposed to, tap that like button, ring the notification bell so you never miss what we put out, and join this community by subscribing, because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be told.